It should be obvious that we cannot solve a crisis with the same methods that got us into it in the first place.
This is a last chance saloon. Because if we don't really take the decisions that are vital now, it's going to be almost impossible to catch up.
We will end the moratorium on extracting our huge reserves of shale, which could get gas flowing as soon as 6 months. We'll give way.
If unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet.
Zerocarbonista.
Hello and welcome to Zerocarbonista, Series 4, Fool's Gold. I'm Ian Collins and this is the UK's #1 environment-based podcast. If it's green, it's in. That's about right, Dale, isn't it? If it's green, it's in.
I think that'll do. It works for me.
We went through all the usual logos. We paid the ad agency lots of money and they were shit. So we came up with, if it's green, it's in. We didn't really pay anybody any money.
No, we didn't. We didn't really do anything, did we?
No. That sounds way too organised.
What we got today?
Well, I reckon, let's start with this. Climate change will cost Germany up to 900 billion euros by 2050, apparently.
Well, that's quite a lot.
So that I would say that's a lot of money. And I assume this is a kind of, if you like, a tacit warning to countries, really. You can put your house in order if you want to, but if you don't, these are the kind of numbers we're looking at.
Yeah. And I remember, I think it was last episode, the one before, we were talking about one of those crazy big sun deflection schemes. You know, there was the earlier one was the one on the moon. And then we came to the UN saying we need to look at doing something like that in the eventuality that we fail to hit our net zero targets, which of course we're on course to do, miss them, that is. And they were saying it'll cost like 100 billion a year for 100 years. You know, and I remember saying, how stupid are we if we're prepared to spend that money for 100 years, because we fail to spend a lot less now to get the job done. And I think, you know, this is an example for Germany, 900 billion if we fail to get to grips with the climate crisis. And we don't need to fail to get to grips with it. You know, particularly on the energy front, wind and solar need no public money. They're economic now. And all we've got to do is unshackle them, in Britain's case, from the planning system and let them get going.
This is the kind of ongoing thing that we revisit all the time, isn't it? So here's some energy that is free and here's some energy that isn't. It's going to cost you an absolute ton of money and the bureaucracy and the shite that goes with it to make it work. Plus, you'll kill the planet while you use it. All this free stuff over here, which one do you want? I mean, it's the no-brainer scenario keeps coming back. And at some point you think, are all these politicians, whether they're in this country or elsewhere, at some point are going to go, can you talk me through that again?
That's right.
And it ties in with this, Del. Britain's defence industry is to be blocked from profiting from the EU's vast increase in spending on arms for Ukraine under a leaked plan seen by The Guardian.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is brilliant. I read this plan and I thought, oh my God, why can't we do this for the climate crisis, right? This plan from the EU is to coordinate all of the countries of the bloc, set an enormous budget to give long-term contracts to the manufacturers of arms so that they have the market certainty to gear up and scale up. And all of this stuff is like music to my ears, if only they were talking about the fucking climate crisis.
I know, that's the funny thing, isn't it? They've got the whole thing worked out when it comes to shooting the freaking life out of people and countries and infrastructure and God knows what. We're very, very organised in destroying the planet in that respect. But when it comes to actually saving the darn thing, we don't know what the hell we're doing.
No, it's an old-fashioned war, and we don't seem to have got our heads around yet fighting this new-fashioned war, this climate crisis thing.
It seems that way. Here's a question. This comes in from Antoinette, who says, Dale, there's a plan to build new wind farms.
Not Mary.
Not her. No. Antoinette says there's a plan to build new wind farms across Wales, but currently the suggestion is that they will be connected to the network by overhead wires. This happens at the same time the Welsh government is moving cables underground. Is one method more efficient, and doesn't it make sense to use energy generated by a wind farm closer to where they are, rather than send 60 plus miles underground or overhead? What's with the cables? What is this?
There's a few questions in there, but yes, one is more efficient than the other. Overhead cables are more efficient because they get cooled by the air. Underground, that doesn't happen. Underground cables are much more expensive to build as well. And so if the Welsh government are undergrounding overhead cables, they'll be doing it in places that are visually sensitive, national parks, maybe stuff like that.
Got it.
As a rule of thumb, overhead is the way it goes because it's so much quicker and cheaper and more efficient. And yes, we should build all forms of energy close to where it gets used. And 60 miles is not that bad, actually. There's an awful lot of wind energy in Scotland that's traveling hundreds of miles, and offshore wind farms, they're shipping their energy probably hundreds of miles as well. And old-fashioned power stations, most of them are up in the north. Cornwall gets that, over at least 100 miles worth of overhead cable. So I think at 60 miles, wind is doing quite well, but we can do better.
What's the deal with the cables? It's just like a man one end and one the other, just pulling it to turn the wind turbines around, or is this a separate thing?
No, these are power cables. They carry the current. They carry the power up and down the country.
Right, gotcha. Okay, because there is some confusion. I think that perhaps turbines work completely on their own, but there is some assistance.
Well, one of the great old myths of wind energy is that the windmills use more electricity to turn themselves than they ever make. But that's from back in the day. I don't think anybody says that anymore, except possibly Mike Graham, our old friend, or my old friend. I think he's your friend as well.
Well, we'll come to Mike Graham in a moment. Okay. Fossil fuel heater ban proposals outrages Germany. The Germans are really under the microscope on this episode, clearly.
Yeah, indeed. And this is an interesting proposal. It's not unlike our own government's proposal to ban the sale of new gas boilers. I think in a few years' time, in order to force people to buy these stupidly expensive heat pumps that will crank up your annual energy bill by 50% and make your house colder in a nutshell, and cause us to build 3 times as much green electricity on the grid as we do need at the moment. So, the heat pump plan is massively flawed. It looks like Germans are going down the same road, banning gas and oil heaters for German households and nudging thereby the population towards heat pumps and district heating and stuff like that. So I think it talks in the article about, this is what we have to do to transition, away from fossil fuel heating, but it isn't. What we have to do is actually transition to green gas, keep the appliances we have, keep the grid that we have, and just change the gas in the system.
Yeah. You might think that, again, is this argument penetrating government at all? Because I've not heard anybody say, oh, by the way, the heat pump idea is off.
Yeah, I haven't either. And blimey, it's begging for it, right? It's begging for it because the statistics are incredible. People's real life experience of heat pumps, increasingly are coming to the fore, and it's bad. I've got a heat pump myself, and this winter, every time the temperature drops below 0, then the house gets cold, and there's nothing I can do about it. That's
why
what it is.
A lot of people listening to this will go, why did you get a heat pump, Dale? You're the greatest advocate that these things are shite.
Yeah. Well, look, I first had one 20 years ago. I had a heat pump, a heat store, all kinds of crazy, edgy things to try and, experiment with getting off of fossil gas. But this time it came with the house I bought. So I didn't choose it. And it's a lovely little place, super energy efficient and all that, and underfloor heating, but it's got a heat pump. And when the temperature goes negative, the heat pump just can't keep up.
That's crazy. And of course, as we established last time, for some homes, it's not just a case of having this boiler switched over, which is cumbersome in itself because it will require more space than a conventional boiler. It might well be that your radiators have to be ripped out because they need to be bigger, and your floor needs to be ripped out to accommodate wider piping in order to service the radiators.
Yeah, well, the ideal heating with a heat pump is underfloor, and if you can't have that, then you usually need to put in bigger radiators because the water that you have in your house is not as hot, and so you need a bigger radiator, more surface area to try and heat your space up. Yeah. There's just nothing right with it, really. And something like 40% of UK homes won't suit a heat pump anyway. 20% absolutely can't have one. Yep. And another 20% will really struggle to be adaptable. And the other 60% are going to face 50% higher energy bills. Whatever the price of energy is, they'll pay 50% more with a heat pump than with a gas boiler. There's all kinds of madness.
Yeah, I'm one of those houses that wouldn't be able to have one without the local council taking me to the magistrate and saying I breached all manner of kind of issues around the age of the house and that kind of stuff, and don't monkey around with these walls, the councillor said, or I'll fucking kill you. And I thought it's a bit harsh from a councillor, but there you go.
They're going to kill you slowly by freezing you to death.
That's right. Yeah. Mr. Freeze, our local councillor.
there's a big issue there, right? With the way the councils and planning law deals with old properties, and the effective ban on modernizing and then making them fit to live in.
Well, I've had this argument. I've got windows that leak like a sieve. They are ridiculous, and I'm not allowed to change them. So all I can do is try and find the right designer for these windows, about 300, 400 years old, which I could do that. But even if I find the right designer, he has to build them like the old ones. So it's still going to end up with the same problem. Yeah. Now, where's I don't know what the compromise is in that. There's got to be one somewhere.
It's maddening. I lived in a house once that had really old glass that was not flat, and I wanted to put in double glazed units.
Yep.
In the original frames to keep the look, and the council said no because flat glass looks different to unflat glass, and that will ruin the look of it.
Yeah,
really, and therefore I had to have single glazed. Yeah, as you say, a couple of 100-year-old glass.
That's right.
I mean, it's self-defeating anyway, because these houses, if people don't live in them, if people can't afford to live in them, then they fall into disrepair. If we want this old stuff looked after, then we've got to look after the people that live in them.
There's no doubt that just changing the windows in my house would alter the energy rating. That alone would. I mean, it's ludicrous.
Yeah, and the comfort factor.
And I wouldn't want to put crap windows in. I don't want to put, some kind of Everest double glazing sort of scenario, but I think there's a way that you can meet a compromise and have something that doesn't in any way betray the kind of aesthetics of what it's meant to do. But the reality of, what are they going to argue the same point in 1,000 years' time? Go, exactly. Sorry, you can't change those windows, but there's only one pane of glass left in them. No, it's how they were intended to be, and it's an utter nonsense. Here's one about methane. Drilling methane leaks could risk triggering climate tipping points.
Well, this one is actually scary, right? We're talking about 1,000 super emitter sites for methane around the world that were gushing methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere last year. And they're all oil and gas sites. Big surprise there. One of them is so bad, it's the equivalent of 67 million cars running. That's the equivalent greenhouse impact of one site.
67 million cars.
Yeah, and these are leaks, right? They aren't being used and harnessed, or there's no good coming from it. They're just leaks. And they found something called a methane bomb. They found 55 of them. It sounds scary, a methane bomb, but it's a fossil fuel extraction site where gas leaks alone from future production will release more methane than 30 years of total US greenhouse gas emissions.
Wow.
What the we can't allow them to do that, can we?
Who would you have to? Who's the person allowing this to happen?
I don't know. It must be that Soros bloke.
It's got to be him.
Him or Gates, right? Is one of them.
Yeah. Mr. Methane is the man behind this. Remember him?
No.
He was actually a speciality act who used to do, the obvious. He could...
his farts.
Yes. Well, no, he could play tunes with his anus. Yeah.
I've been missing out.
His God Save the Queen was to die for, I have to say.
He'll need to re-record it now.
Yeah. Best trombone you ever heard. This from Teresa. Any plans to get into the eco-housing market, Dale? I believe there's a huge untapped demand for it. We were just chatting, really, I suppose, in a connected area.
Yeah, really. I'm madly busy and I'm trying to not start new things. I'm not having a lot of success at that. But housing, I see the need. We've got definitely one project where we'll get dragged into the housing industry for sure. That's Forest Green. When we move to Eco Park, we'll have a almost 10-acre site and a room for about 100 homes. We're hoping to make them low carbon and affordable. And we're looking at prefab construction and stuff like that. Some funky new things being done with quick to build, super cheap, super efficient homes. The short answer is yes, we're definitely going to get involved. And the long answer was what I just said.
There it is. It's actually the long and short answer are the same answer, as it turns out, which I think is nice synergy in the answer department. UK flood damage bill could rise by 20% due to global warming.
So look, I'm going to file this in the list of tell me something a bit less obvious, right? Yeah. UK flood damage, of course the bill is going to rise due to global warming. We all know that 20%. Okay, that's a new number, but honestly, come on, this is a non-piece of news from my perspective. It's like, yeah, okay, let's move on.
What about this story that I know you spotted? EU countries delay vote on landmark law to end the sale of CO2 emitting cars.
Yeah, I like this story. I mean, at first look at it, I was a bit concerned, actually, because the EU have proposed a law, it's not quite passed yet, to ban internal combustion engine cars pretty much by 2035. And a couple of countries like Italy, and I think one part of the German ruling party or government as well, have proposed or argued that there should be room for something called e-fuels, synthetic fuels to run combustion engines. And they're not completely clean, of course, because they burn something. And the EU have said, look, we'll have some words in that will allow that, but there's been some kickback, and the German government is split. They may have to abstain, and if they do, with Italy being against the law, it could go backwards. But I don't think that will happen. I don't know why I like the story, really. There's obviously still a battle at the heart of the EU. I know why I liked it. Audi came out and said, no, come on, guys. We've committed to the end of the internal combustion engine because electric vehicles are far more efficient. End of. And I thought, yeah, that's it. That's brilliant. That's from industry. Yeah. We've got the electric car, right? We've got all the tech. They work so well. We don't need to be wrangling over something called e-fuels.
And industry is always ahead of government in these respects, generally speaking. And on this, when a company like Audi come out the traps and say that, then you tend to, the politicians should really go, well, I'm this week's energy minister. I know absolutely jack shit about the very brief I'm given. So I should really listen to the Audi boys. And I thought it was interesting. There was another story. The EU targets 40% of clean tech to be made within the bloc by 2030. So that does show you, and this is, competition support green tech essentially between different markets, different territories, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I love that one too. Just going back to the car story ever so briefly, e-fuels, as far as I'm concerned, aren't in the world. And they're one of these kind of future techs like carbon capture and storage that some parts of industry like to talk up as an answer to carrying on with business as usual. So, we just need to forget them. But yeah, this story was really fantastic. The EU are setting up a fund to compete with the American fund. I think it's the something Inflation Act or something. They're going to put 400 billion into stimulating the green economy. Yeah. And as part of that, they're paying people to make stuff in America, basically. The EU is setting up to compete, to pay people to make stuff in the EU, and China is already competing at the same time. So the three big trading blocks of the world are now having an arms race to be the kind of capital of green tech. I think that's fantastic. Obviously, we're sat on the sidelines looking at that because we made the most stupid decision.
We ain't part of any block at all. No.
We're the blockheads, but we ain't in no block.
But we get blue passports now.
I haven't got one yet.
But I tell you what, there's one in our house. Let's get one from a little boy, and obviously because it was his first passport, there it was, blue. And for some people, they were getting literally aroused by this. Wow. They're like, wow, it's now my passport's blue. Your passport is 29 times of less value than it used to be. Think about it like that.
And by the way, it's a lot less use if you want to get into the EU without hassle.
Correct, yes. Yeah, join the queue and all the rest of it. Fossil fuel companies donate £700 million to US universities over a decade. Well, who the hell would have thought that?
Yeah, just another one of them stories, isn't it? Yeah. The kind of insidious influence of big oil and the money they chuck at, lobbyists as well as researchers and universities and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Hey ho! I was at Oxford Uni last night.
Really?
Giving
love
a talk
you over there.
Yeah, giving a talk to some students, talking about business and my book and the stuff I've done and the environment and forest green. I had a right old time. The place is amazing, right? I've never been there before. A bit like a mini Hogwarts.
I did a thing there as well with the psychologist and a psychopath. Seriously, and I kind of moderated this debate, and it was. I had exactly that, and I stayed overnight there as well. And you can't help without sounding twee, but you can't help be kind of enveloped by the history and the design and the architecture of the place. You feel it, right?
Yeah, it's a really cute little place, actually, dating back to the 13th century. Some bits of it.
I reckon if they keep that up, they could knock out some really intelligent people in the years to come. I think it's a good business plan they've got going on there.
I wonder what their windows are like.
I was about their window. Now, they would fail every test, wouldn't they? The window department. And there's, again, the council go, sorry, can't change that. Oh, look who's here again. It's Mr. Freeze, the Councillor of Doom. They'd never get past anything. And I've just heard, what's that? Is that the Book Bugle I can hear, Dale? There it is again.
No, surely not.
There's a couple of points on this. The Book Bugle. By the way, this is selling incredibly well. And the reason we mention this, and I know you're the last bloke in the world that ever wants to kind of do that thing of singing your own praises and and promoting stuff in that kind of sense, because it's not you. But so I can do a bit of this for you. But this is the paperback version of the book, which has 2 new chapters. There's a big discount on it, and Mike Graham said he wasn't going to buy it.
Yeah, I was on the radio with him this morning. I mean, I love Mike. He's such fun, and I haven't spoken to him for a while. And oh my word, he's so extreme. I laugh at him, and then he just smiles and laughs back because he knows he's being extreme. The stuff he says, But it's great because I get the chance to speak to him and his audience, and if they even believe a little bit of what he's selling, it's important that I'm there. But yeah, he ended his show by saying he's got a new book out. I'm not buying it. I thought that was a great sign up. We'd already given him one anyway.
That's brilliant. But it is genuinely selling really well. And there is, we mentioned that there's the foreword by John Robb in there as well, and it's like $4.99 as well, which you can't really go wrong with. And
now we discounted it for like all our social media followers and people. And I was in Oxford last night, as I mentioned, and the guy running the show, he said, I tried to buy your book, and like Blackstones didn't have it. Waterstones said they could get one from Amsterdam, and I'm like, WTF? I think Penguin haven't put enough out in the world. I can't believe it's selling so many that you can't get one from a Waterstone.
But if you go to fgr.co.uk/shop, then you can. That's where you go. fgr.co.uk/shop. It's the paperback version. It's $4.99. There's new chapters in there. And it's, I think probably, only a matter of time before the next book comes out, Dale. But that's a whole other, story. In fact, tying in with that, Gemma says, is your audiobook getting an update for the new chapters?
Oh, that's a good question, Gemma. Thanks for that, because the audiobook update has been a bit irritating. It's taking much longer than it should have done. So currently it's the old version, and I keep getting social media messages from people saying, oh, I just bought it on audiobook, and I'm thinking, shit, you didn't. You got the old one. And
right, yeah.
It's because we can't even get the old one taken down. I asked that question. So it's going to be a couple of weeks, but it is coming. We've done it. We've recorded the chapters and everything's been stitched together. It's just stuck in the pipe.
Final question from Chris on Facebook. I heard you mentioning the Big Dunk Burger. What's in one, and how does Ronald McDonald feel about this?
Well, I'm hoping he feels choked, right?
Yeah, darn right.
I'm hoping he tries one and chokes on it, because it's a beautiful burger. It's got such a story behind it. We've got a bun made for us by Hobbs from wheat grown just down the road in Swindon on a wild farm. Yep. We can talk about that in another episode, what wild farming is. We've got some kind of sauerkraut compote to put into the burger. That's good for gut biome. Nice. We've got this massive patty that we've made at the Devil's Kitchen, and then it's shredded lettuce and tomato and a bit of relish. It's just going to be a super old school, really big burger, like about it's like 110, 120 millimeters across, 5 ounces. Nice. It's going to be worthy of the name Big Dunk, right? And I'm hoping that Big Mac take a little bit of umbrage and, because then it'll be fun.
And there's no meat in it, of course.
Oh, no. You didn't even have to say that.
Well, somebody might listen to that and go, hang on a second, he's not mentioned this yet. So I thought I'd better just throw that caveat in there. This is a vegan burger, but hell, you're going to love every bite of this beast.
Absolutely. We were talking about that last night with the students, right? About not labeling something like, if you call it vegan, what you're really saying is what's not in it.
Correct.
Right? And I much rather prefer to talk about what's in it.
Yeah, and as we always say, chips are vegan, and that should be said. It can't be said loud enough.
I've got it on a T-shirt now.
Yeah, there's a whole thing there. We can use that for the festivals this year. Chips are vegan. Fabulous. Dale, we're speaking a week.
Yeah, looking forward to it. See you later, Ian.
And that is it from this episode. Don't forget you can follow this podcast from your podcast provider so that you get each new one automatically. Make sure you leave a review there too. If you want to get in touch, zerocarbonista at ecotristy.co.uk. Really important bit to follow Dale on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on TikTok. Dead simple to find.
Zero Carbon East.